This bill, as it's being presented today, would allow violent offenders to share the floor space with unknowing residents. There are consequences for breaking the law, and we need to make public safety a priority once again in this city.
You are taking away the rights of the landlords. Are we talking about murderers that are gonna come and live next door to us? Look, this is not discrimination, this is reality.
I'm 53 years old and disabled after having a stroke. What can I do to hurt anyone? And I'm still being excluded from housing because of something that happened decades ago.
I've been out of prison for 15 years now. I can't even be sure of securing rental housing, and I could end up on the streets at any given moment. This is not just a New York problem. This is an American crisis.
Housing is a human right!
Fight, fight, fight!
Housing is a human right!
Fight, fight, fight!
New York City is considering legislation that would prohibit landlords from using criminal background checks in approving tenants. According to a report from the National Consumer Law Center, it's standard practice for nearly 90% of landlords. But these reports are largely automated, and without federal regulations or industry standards, background check companies may undergo only minimal, if any, manual review, leading to potentially inaccurate and unreliable reports. Set that against a criminal justice system that's pretty much racist, and you can see the problem. People of color being gatekept out of the most competitive neighborhoods. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has twice cautioned landlords against making wholesale decisions based on criminal history, but have yet to make the practice illegal. Chanel Rhimes is one of countless Americans saying they're still being denied outright. In her 20s and 30s, she was convicted of low-level charges that resulted in 2 days jail time, 4 months of electronic home monitoring, and community service. Today, at 40, she's the director of a nonprofit and works closely with the state of Washington. In applying for apartments, you knew that they were going to look at your criminal record. Mm-hmm. You say you tried to compensate for that by providing all of these things, certificates, awards that you've earned over the past few years.
Yep.
What were some of those things?
Let's see. I got a letter appointing me to the Joint Legislative Task Force, a letter from Department of Corrections.
So this comes from the Department of Corrections saying that you are a stellar citizen.
My degree from Evergreen. I did Columbia. I did the Women Transcending Collective Leadership Institute.
You presented all of this with your applications, and they said no.
Yep, right.
How many times have you been denied an apartment?
8.
8 times.
I was getting denied before I even seen the unit.
Do you feel locked in with this apartment and this landlord because you can't find somewhere else?
Yes.
Because of your criminal record?
Yes.
I don't want to get in your pockets, but how much has the rent been raised?
So I started out at $1,325. I now pay $2,600. And I feel locked into everything. If I can't lower my rent, I can't pay other things, I can't improve my credit score, it's a circle. I'm locked in with everything. How long do people have to do that? How long do people have to say? So once you do something, that's it forever? There has to be a cutoff point. When do people get to redeem themselves? When?
A handful of progressive cities agree. Oakland, Berkeley, Seattle, and Portland have already passed their own versions of the Fair Chance housing ordinances. Seattle banned criminal background checks back in 2017. We're here to meet with landlords who say it's bad for both business and public safety.
This is crazy. This is totally crazy. You know, you don't know who's living right next door to you. Is a murderer, thief, robber. You know, I know petty theft, somebody, a parking violation, a speeding ticket, that's very different. But you need to know who's your neighbor is.
Riz Samad couldn't run a background check when he rented his property in early 2020. He ended up approving the application of a man with a lengthy criminal background. But because of Seattle's strong tenant protections and a backlogged housing court, Riz hasn't been able to evict him.
He's a violent person. I only begged him, do not destroy my property, do not make noise, do not motorbike in the middle of the night, do not create fear. And as a result of that, his friend pulled a gun on us. You know, and basically, I wired my house, I got all the, cameras and all those things, and he's telling me, I know where you live.
It looks like somebody just came out here and turned a generator.
Oh yeah, they start bringing generator, which runs 24/7.
So there's no power in the house except for
No.
what these generators
Generator. So there was one generator on the back which burned all this thing.
This burnt hut right here is a result of a generator.
Yes. And it's still, I can't do anything.
If I had a little money in my pocket and I say, I want to move to Seattle, buy some property, and rent it out to tenants.
I'll say, for God's sake, do not invest a penny in Seattle.
Recent figures show that 14% of small landlord-owned units fell off the market since the Fair Chance Housing Act was passed. The dip highlights one of the unintended consequences of fair chance legislation. By forcing small-scale landlords to sell, some of the most affordable housing units are being wiped off the market. Marilyn Yim and her husband filed a lawsuit against the city in an attempt to help, as she puts it, the little guy stay in. Walk me through what made you want to sue the city of Seattle.
It impacts our ability to continue providing housing to small landlords, and especially with our situation of living in the same property, the same home as our tenants.
I'm not sure if anyone listening to this would find what you're saying to be unreasonable. I think there's also the idea that people will use criminal background records to discriminate.
Right.
Are you able to understand that side of things?
I do think that most of these laws have come from a good place. It's trying to correct for systemic racism, bias, discrimination. There are some unfair practices out there, absolutely. Yeah. I do want people to be protected by the law. Yeah. Seattle's law, though, prohibits us from even accessing public records. It doesn't matter how violent, how recent, how consistent, escalating, that somebody's criminal record has been.
Housing discrimination forces limits on where people can live. Those limits have significant consequences. We're here at Harvard to chat with Dr. Raj Chetty about the work he and his team are doing to show why and how zip codes actually matter. There's this idea that, no matter where you come from, no matter where you live, you just work hard, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, and you have just as much chance as anyone else. What has your research said about this?
Well, that's certainly the myth of the American dream.
Dr. Chetty and his colleagues at Opportunity Insights have used anonymized tax returns tracked over decades to prove that the zip code where a person is born all but determines their life's trajectory. It seems to be a lot going on here.
There's a lot going on, as you said, but it's really quite simple. It's kind of showing you where the opportunity is in America. Let's go to Seattle. These red-colored patches that we're seeing here, what we're seeing here is if you grew up as a kid in a low-income family, a family making, say, around $30,000 a year, you yourself as an adult are making something like $24,000 a year. But if I go up here to some of these areas, north of the city, that number jumps up to 42,000. And let me take you to a very different city, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Here's incarceration. The fraction of kids that grow up to be incarcerated, there are some shockingly high rates in parts of Milwaukee. Like, see that one there? 16% of kids growing up in low-income families there were incarcerated on a single day, right? I mean, It's an unbelievable rate.
Throughout history, there's been discrimination when it comes to housing and where people live. Redlining, credit checks, background checks. And so when you look at this research, do you connect it to discriminatory practices?
What we're finding is that some folks have much less access to neighborhoods where we see much higher levels of upward mobility. And I think what that ends up creating is further amplification of the divides between Black and white Americans, between low-income and high-income Americans, because you have this segregation in American cities.
There are many people who won't even rent to folks who have a criminal background. And so these people who are incarcerated, once they're released, they have no choice but to live in the place where they were living when they were incarcerated.
And that's what creates the generational persistence.
That generational impact is massive. More than 5 million American children have a parent who's been locked up. One of those parents is Yusuf Dahl. At 18, he was convicted on drug distribution charges in Milwaukee and served 5 years in state prison. In the 25 years since, he's done as much bootstrap pulling as someone can do. He's got a master's from Princeton, worked in real estate for decades, and is the CEO of his own nonprofit. But when he and his daughter moved to Allentown, Pennsylvania, he was denied housing because of his criminal background. So the school that you wanted your daughter to attend is in this community?
Correct. I spent the last 25 years working 16 hours a day to have the resources to put my family in this community. Yet because of that decision from over 25 years ago, it doesn't matter. Legally, they can keep me out.
And they have.
They have. When I was unable to secure housing in the community that was going to support my daughter, it put me in a situation I never thought that I would be put in. We live in an area where the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has designated the high school as failing. You are punishing entire families because of something someone has done in the past, and by the way, has paid that cost to society.
Could you see how a landlord would say, I have these other potential tenants lined up that can pay the same amount without the notion of a potential risk?
First of all, I don't have to imagine. My background is in housing. So I operated 200 units of affordable housing in the city of Milwaukee. I know the housing business. And what matters to a landlord in assessing the risk or predicting the success of a tenant, it's do you have the income to afford the property? And do you have a track record of paying your bills in the past? But your logic presumes there's some equality or fairness around who has been justice impacted. We know that race, income are predictors of justice involvement. And so if you take this position, well, you're perpetuating a system of discrimination and disadvantage that has plagued this country from the very beginning. Our family was able to make some sacrifices and send her to an independent school.
So you're paying for her to go to school?
Yes, I am.
I mean, that in and of itself speaks to this problem.
And we're fortunate to have the resources to be able to do that.
What does success in this fight look like for you?
I know we will be successful when a person who has paid their debt to society can live where they want, not where they're allowed.